In the oppressive gloom of his dour Victorian-era house, Kenneth reigns over a crumbling empire, a once lauded doctor, now a pariah in a fedora, marooned in a relic of soot-dark brick and drooping gables. The place sags under neglect, its tangled garden a snarl of thorns, a fitting tomb for a man who's traded the NHS's sterile halls for the murky brew of homeopathy. Dandelion serums, belladonna drips, and hemlock tonics bubble in his parlor, a makeshift apothecary, where he wages war on what he calls big science. To the medical board, he's a quack, a fraud stripped of his license. To himself, he's a steely gunslinger, a righteous outlaw spitting in the face of a corrupt posse. This morning, a patient crawled in, mumps or something like that, a swollen, pitiful heap dragging himself across the threshold. "Nurse," Kenneth barked, his voice a whip crack slicing the stale air. "Mix up some dandelion serum. Now." His wife, an elderly shadow of a woman, shuffled to obey. Nurse Evans, his long-suffering tether to the world, her hands trembling as she mashed the yellow weeds into a quackery potion. Kenneth slumped into a threadbare chair, fedora tipped low, watching with a sneer as she worked. The patient, perking up after choking down the bitter elixir, fumbled out a few crumpled notes. Money's for the miracle. To Kenneth, it was no act of mercy. Each cure was a notch on his belt, another slug fired in his private shootout with the medical establishment. Victory tasted cold, metallic, like gunpowder on the wind. In his idle hours, he barricades himself in a dank study, the air thick with the clatter of an ancient projector. There, he escapes into cowboy flicks, Tom Mix charging through dust, Gene Autry strumming a lonesome tune, Roy Rogers twirling a six-shooter with a grin. These aren't just films to Kenneth. They're his gospel truth. He sees himself as the dashing lead, fedora cocked like a Stetson, white coat swapped for a duster streaked with elderflower stains. In his head, he's a lone rider, pistol blazing. Patience his cattle to prod, authorities as sneering bandits. The thrill hits like a slug of rock gut, a frigid jolt not from healing, but from defying the lawmen who branded him a sham. That branding came hard and fast. The medical board had stomached his NHS homeopathy mash-up for a while, their jaws tight. But when he ditched their lies entirely, they struck. Last month, they dragged him before their tribunal. Voices sharp as spurs. Reckless. Fraudulent. Quack. They tore his license away, booted him out. A wound that burned his pride raw. Furious, he didn't flinch. He roared. "They're the crooks," he hissed, pacing his parlor. A pack of yellow-bellied sheriffs peddling poison. His war with them turned into a frontier grudge, each patient's cure, a shot across their bow, each homeopathic brew a middle finger to their rule. His final years unravel in a spiral of ice and delusion. Kenneth doubled down on his quackery, then doubled down again, alienating colleagues, friends, even the desperate who once sought him out. Patience dwindled. Mrs. Hargreaves, Mr. Patel, a handful of others. But he didn't care. They were obstacles, buzzing flies in his vendetta, or tools to carve his legend, each shaky recovery a tally against the establishment. When a patient died, lung season or kidneys failing, he clocked it up to their stupidity, not his folly. "Didn't follow my orders right," he'd growl, brushing it off like dust from his boots. All that remains now is his elderly nurse wife, her eyes hollow from decades of his cold, steely glare. A blast of winter wind trailing him as he stalks the house. The parlor's his saloon now. Patients slump like drunks, sipping his serums under his barked commands. More nettle, you slow nag, he snaps at her, sizing her up as a gear to grind his weeds, a relic he'll ditch when she finally breaks. The kitchen's his outlaw forge. Scales clank, vials hiss, a gunslinger's precision in every drop. He imagines the chief consultant, that slick-talking snake. As the cattle baron he'll outdraw, charming him with yarns of saved souls, only to ride off with the bored scout. Reinstatement, or better, ruin. His fury peaks alone. Their worm, he mutters, staring at a cracked mirror. Too dumb to see my brilliance. The board's rejection festers, a scar he salves with cowboy dreams, picturing himself on a stallion. Gun smoke curling as he downs the liars, patience cheering like a freed posse. His homeopathy's no cure now. It's a standoff, each potion a round in his chamber. Kenneth, fedored and frigid, sits alone in his dour husk, a steelly detached figure utterly convinced of his own glory. Cold as a desert night, unyielding as the grave,